wanted to come on here quick to remind you that today is the last day to get the free bonus workshop on Half-Halts when you sign up for my new course on flying changes. I know a lot of you guys have already signed up for the course, which is fantastic. I'm so excited to get to work with you on your flying changes. So in today's live session, surprise live session, I want to talk to you a little bit about Half-Halts. I also want to answer some questions about flying changes because I know that there were several questions during the webinar on flying changes that I did not get to. If you missed the webinar, please watch the replay. The replay will only be available until Saturday. So you definitely want to watch the webinar replay before Saturday. There were so many great slides, so many great takeaways. I put a lot of time into creating these presentations and really helping you guys to understand the theory and the biomechanics of a flying change and the training that you need to do to actually get your horse to do a flying change. So to start with, Half-Halts. When you sign up today by 1 p.m., you get this awesome free bonus on Half-Halts. It's valued at $139, so it's a really great value. Get it for free. Half-Halts are this like mysterious thing that we all want to learn more about. What is a half-halt? Think about that for a moment. It's tricky because half-halt is a misnomer. There's really nothing about halting that you want to do when you're doing a half-halt. So a half-halt is about rebalancing your horse, getting your horse to take more weight behind and to lift in the front end. Half-halt is also about getting your horse's attention. So rebalancing your horse and getting your horse's attention are two very important things, regardless of whether you're going to be doing a transition or a flying change or whatever. So in this workshop, we really go into the details of what is a half-halt, how do you ride a half-halt. There are 2 lectures that I give all about half-halts, where I go through a bunch of slides, explain to you about the definition of a half-halt, different types of half-halts, exactly what your body should be doing. The other thing that's important about half-halts is that they're a little bit different on every horse. So a lazy horse needs a different kind of half-halt than a hot horse. And that's really important to figure out, is kind of what is the best type of half-halt that works for your horse. When do you need to do a stronger half-halt? When do you need to do less of a half-halt? And also thinking about like, how many half-halts do you give in a ride? For those of you guys that are watching now, let me know what you think. Like, how many half-halts in a typical 45-minute ride are you giving your horse? And I would say that you should, my advice is to give more frequent, smaller half-halts rather than bigger ones. But you also don't want to be half-halting your horse constantly, because if you're constantly half-halting your horse, then your horse is going to start to ignore it. All right, let's see who's here. Let me know if you're watching live, where you're tuning in from. Hello, Angela. Someone else says, I signed up for the class and going through the material now. Do you want to see, I want to go see the webinar, or is it just okay to keep going through the flying change material? Yeah, so I would definitely say that you should watch the flying changes webinar. It's really, really good. Of course, in the course, there's more specific like riding exercises. And inside the flying change course, I show you exactly the prerequisites that you need to do to get ready for the flying changes, the exercises to introduce the flying changes. But the webinar is also great because it gives you the theory behind teaching the flying changes and really understanding what your horse has to do. Okay, Angela's in New York. Journal With Me is in Barcelona. Milan says hello. Renee, hello from Illinois. Okay, good to see all of you guys. So I think that that's all. I want to talk a little bit about flying changes, and I have like this big list of questions that I did not get to during the webinar on Sunday. Flying changes, there's like such a dichotomy between flying changes and like They're so magical and majestic. Let me know if you're here live what word you would use to describe a flying change. They are like just this amazing moment of communication and harmony with your horse. I think my favorite horses flying changes are Glamourdale's flying changes. I mean, his flying changes are just so like big and uphill and expressive, and they're really just flying. Like riding a flying change is like flying. And Angela says flying changes are so complex. Milan says flying changes are so powerful. All of these words totally represent flying changes. That said, they can be really, really hard to teach. Like teaching the flying changes can be frustrating, discouraging. I know pretty much with every horse that I've ever taught the flying changes to, which is a lot of horses, you go into the dumps before it gets better. Like before you get to the beauty and the magic of the flying change, things really fall apart. And usually the horse gets tense, confused. Sometimes they do some acrobatics like bucking, leaping, running off. A lot of things come up. And so it's really important. And what I outline in the course is the exact steps that you need to take, because the better prepared you are to start teaching the flying changes, the more that you go back to the basics, the less stressful that whole process is going to be. And flying changes are definitely something that you need help and support to teach your horse the flying changes. You can't do it alone. I don't do it alone. I have eyes on the ground. I have a bunch of exercises and tools in my toolbox, which I teach you guys in the course. So I really hope that you will join. Okay, here's first question. When exactly do you ask for the flying change? So the flying change, you want to ask for the flying change right when the horse's front leg is on the ground, because in the next moment, the horse jumps off the ground with all four legs. The moment of suspension is when the flying change actually happens. So when your horse is off the ground, that's when they do the flying change. So you want to ask for the flying change when the front leg is on the ground. I recommend counting. So if I'm going to do a flying change, I go like 1, 2, 3, 8, so that you get that rhythm in your body and in your mind, and then that you switch your legs at the correct position. Another question, what do you mean by forward and back in the canter? Is that about collection? So yes, before you start working on the changes, it's really important that you can adjust your horse's canter stride, that you can go forward and collect and go forward and collect. That's really, really important. And if you don't have this adjustability in the canter, then you shouldn't ask for a flying change yet, because you need to be able to adjust the energy in your horse, make the strides bigger, make the strides shorter. What this does is it collects your horse, and it also gets more suspension and more air time, which is when you need the flying change to happen. Next question. I have an off the track thoroughbred that has a track change. So a track change, or like a jumper change, is horses that they'll do a flying change, but it's not collected and it's not on the aids. And a lot of times it's not clean behind, like they don't change in front and behind at the same time. So the question is, how do I keep him sane when I'm reteaching the flying changes? I've been working on simple changes and he gets the concept. So yeah, when you're trying to reteach your horse and to do it on the aids, you first have to work on the canter quality, work on the collection, getting the horse more engaged, the simple changes like the canter walk, canter transitions, because the aid for a flying change is the aid for canter. It's the same thing. And so the more reliable and accepting that your horse is of the canter aid itself. Like if you have a hot horse, you have to be able to ask for canter. You have to be able to go from the walk, put your legs on, get the canter without your horse overreacting. And that is going to be the best way to retrain. The other thing is playing with the location and the pattern where you place the flying change. And this is one thing inside the course that I explain and that I show you guys is several different patterns that you can use to teach the flying changes. I don't like to teach the flying changes across the diagonal, because if you are always doing a flying change when you go across the diagonal, guess what happens? The horse starts to anticipate that every time you go across the diagonal, they're due a flying change. And then it gets like worse and worse. So you need to have several different patterns and different locations where you're going to be asking your horse or teaching your horse the flying changes. And I do not recommend doing it on the diagonal. Okay, Helene has a question from us here on YouTube. Pros and cons starting the flying changes before counter canter. Okay, so this is a really good question. And I recommend that you should do counter canter before you start teaching the flying changes. That's the way it's designed in the dressage test. Like in second level, you do counter canter before flying changes. The reason for this is because counter canter is a test of your horse's balance and your horse's straightness. So it is good to test that and to be able to do the counter canter before you start doing the changes. However, you do not want to do so much counter canter that your horse gets so balanced and comfortable in the counter canter that then you're not able to get your horse to do a flying change. So there's kind of this balance of, yes, you want to introduce the counter canter first, but you don't want to do it so much that your horse never thinks to do a change. So these are all such good questions. And what's really I've tried to do with the course is I've taught a lot of horses how to do flying changes. I mean, all inclusive, I think I've worked with probably more than 100 horses. I've taught my students how to do flying changes, like taught them how to teach their horse the flying changes. And every horse is a little bit different, but there's definitely certain prerequisites that you need to have, certain formula that you need to have before you start working on the changes. And that's one thing that I really go through a lot in my course as well, is even if you're not ready to do the flying changes, the course has so much information on the basics and helping to get you to that point where you're ready to start working on the flying changes. There's a really great slide. My favorite slide in the webinar is an iceberg. It's a photo of an iceberg, because in an iceberg, 90% of the ice is below the water, 10% of the ice is above the water. When you're working on flying changes, 90% of it is on your basics, your canter quality, your suppleness, your throughness, the connection. That's where you're spending the bulk of your time. Flying changes is like the reward for all the work that you've done on your basics. And think of flying changes as like the motivation. Like flying changes is your goal and your dream and your motivation to really work on your canter and really work on the basics. So even if you're not quite ready to work on the flying changes, then the course still has a lot of great information for you. Milan, what do you do with a horse that gets anxious about changing? My horse is an ex-reiner that tends to anticipate and get worked up. So yes, anticipation, that is a big thing. I was reading the students, when you sign up for the course, you'll take like a survey about flying changes, just to give me an idea of where you are on your journey with flying changes, what you're struggling with. One of the biggest things that the students are struggling with is anticipation. So whenever your horse is, the hard thing about flying changes is that you want them to be ready all the time to do a flying change, but you also want them waiting. So whenever your horse is anticipating, do not do a flying change. I would recommend counter cantering or going back to your canter walk canter transitions and waiting for your horse to accept the aids. The other thing that's really important when you're working on the flying change is you want to be able to change the bend in your horse's body. Like you want to be able to bend your horse the other way and have them wait for the flying change until you actually change your leg position. So that's really important to remember, that your leg position is what actually gives the cue for the flying change. So not the change of direction. And that's why I said you don't want to always do a flying change on the diagonal, or you don't always want to do the flying change when you change direction, because you want to teach your horse to rely on your leg position. That's what indicates the lead. So Lisa, is the correct timing when the inside front is on the ground? Yes. So when your horse's front legs land on the ground, that's when you ask for the flying change, because in the next moment, your horse leaps up in the air. When they're in the suspension phase, that's when they switch their legs from one lead to the other. It's really amazing. In the webinar, I showed like a slow motion view of a horse doing a flying change, and it's pretty amazing to see them like spring off the ground and switch their legs in midair. It's pretty amazing. Okay, let's see. Here's another good question. Do you think it's more difficult for an older horse to learn the flying changes, or are the correct basics and setup going to get them there? There's another question. Can my horse do a flying change? So every horse does flying changes. Like if you turn them out in the pasture in a field, it's their natural way of rebalancing. So when they go across the diagonal, they naturally change leads because it puts them into a better balance. So yes, any horse can do a flying change. The hard part is teaching them to do it on your aids when you ask them to do it. But the more that you work on your basics and like the walk canter transitions and the collection and the forward and back in the canter, then the better your flying change is going to be. It is a little bit more difficult to teach the flying changes on an older horse versus a younger horse, because like everything, it's easier for us to learn things when we're young, and the older we get, the harder it is for us to learn new things. So it is a little bit easier to teach a younger horse flying changes, but it is possible to teach an older horse as well, because like I said, I bet when you turn them out in the field, they do flying changes on their own. So anyways, I hope that this answers some of your guys' questions about flying changes. The course is open until Saturday. You're going to get $100 off plus the free bonus workshop on Half-Halts when you sign up by today at 1 p.m. Pacific time. And this is a really cool course. I've been working on it for several months, probably like 6 months. I've been filming for it. And I really show you the nitty gritty of teaching a horse that's never done changes before, working with a horse that anticipates, working with horses that are late behind, working with horses that get crooked, all types of different horses in the program. It's not just showing you, here's my perfect Grand Prix horse doing perfect changes. It really dives into the details of what it takes to teach the flying changes. And so I'm looking forward to working with you guys. If you've already signed up, thank you. If you're still thinking about it, think about it. If you have questions, email me, support@AmeliaNewcombDressage.com, and I'm happy to answer your questions. So I hope you guys all have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will see you soon. Bye, everyone.